If you are close to retirement or recently retired, you can't afford to miss this commercial. What if I told you one of the biggest dangers to running out of money in retirement was a risk you've never heard of before? If you've never heard of sequence of return risk, please check out the trailer at sequenceofreturnrisk.com. And remember, an investment in knowledge pays the best interest. Benjamin Franklin.
Tim Picciott, get us going, man.
Good morning, everybody. We figured that we'll get the finance guy here first because it'll only be downhill after that. But so this morning what I'm going to do is I have a presentation called The Trump Effect and Why Good News, in quotes, is bad news. And again, I know that all the financial data is rigged. I just wrote a book on how it's rigged, so I'm just going off the headline numbers that we talk about. But what I mean by that is there's several, there's a lot of good data that is coming out. And so when there's good data, the Fed is going to have less cover to not raise rates. And so when you raise rates, that's going to lead to the bad news. Now, again, there's two sides of every coin here, but I only have 20 minutes, so we're not going to get into every little detail. So the bad news is that when the Fed raises rates, that the bigger the bubble you have, the smaller the pin you need to pop that bubble. So what we have here is in the green line, we have the S&P 500. So in the red line, what we have is the last 12 months trailing earnings of the earnings per share of the S&P 500. Now what you see is that in late 2014, the earnings, as soon as we get out of the way, so in late 2014, what we can see is that the earnings are actually lower today than what they were. More today than what they were in 2014.
Play the lines again.
Yeah, so the lines are, so in the red line you have the last 12 months earnings per share of the S&P 500, and the big point there is it's lower today than it was 2.5 years ago. In the red line, or sorry, in the green line you have the S&P 500, so the current value of where it is today. So what you can see there is, we're calling it the Trump hope gap, is that everyone thinks that all this great stuff is going to be coming on board now that Donald Trump is elected, that, you know, the second coming of Christ is here, and that we can, and again, I was a big Trump supporter and I wanted Trump to win over Hillary Clinton, but I wanted him to be the one to manage the crisis, not that he was going to magically avert everything, because you could even put Ron Paul in there and he's not going to be able to avert what I think may or may not be coming. What this line is right here, it's called the CAPE index. So if you're familiar with the PE ratio, and what the PE ratio is, it's price to earnings. So generally the higher the PE ratio, the more expensive a stock is, relatively speaking. So what the Case-Shiller PE does, or what the CAPE does, is it smooths out the PE over the last 10 years. So there's some flaws with it, but again, I have 20 minutes, so I can't get into all the rabbit holes of this. But an average PE is around 16. I think I looked at it last night, we're at 29. In this chart back in January, it was 28. So again, average is 16. The only times we've really been in this neighborhood were, 2007, 1999, when companies didn't even have earnings because of, the dot-com boom, when people were just buying names of domain names, and all of a sudden they're worth millions of dollars. So that's why there's an extreme aberration in 99. So you've got 1929, 1999, 2007 are the only other times where the CAPE has been basically close to where it is today. So again, not three years you don't really want to be associated with. Now, other ways people value, because there's many different ways you can look at PE ratios. You can do the forward earnings, trailing earnings, the CAPE. I don't have time to get into everything, but with a standard PE ratio of just looking back at the trailing 12-month earnings, back in January it was at 24. I think today it's actually much higher than that. So again, average is 16. That means that the earnings either need to go way up, or the stock price needs to go way down, or some sort of combination of the two, just to be a fair value.
The average over what period of time?
Basically going back to like the 1800s.
No questions till the end. None.
Okay. All right. And so why this is important? Again, I do retirement planning for a living. 99% of what I'm going to say is not a pitch. I'm just trying to give you guys information. But what this means for myself and my clients is when the stocks are in the top quintile of being expensive, as you judge it by PE ratio. So what it means is the top 20% of being expensive. which we're at right now, the forward 10-year earnings on the stock market is only average 4% per year. Now again, what that usually means is you get like a 2007, 2008 in there where everything goes down, and then, you know, as long as you didn't sell and as long as you stuck to your guns, you'd probably be okay. The problem is a lot of people have a lot more risk than they can handle, and then they capitulate and they sell in March 2009, and then they never get to ride things back up. Or the government starts forcing you to take money out at 70.5, and so then you are a victim of something called sequence of return risk, where it's not about what your average return is, it's about what the order of that return, and I'm going to touch that a little bit later on. So again, in the 2009 type environment, when the PEs are very much more attractive and cheap, when you're at the bottom 20 percentile being expensive, the forward 10-year return is 16%. Right now we're in the category where the forward 10-year return is only 4%, which, if you are a retiree who didn't save nearly as much money as you should have, and now the bonds are going to get you 1-2%, the stocks on a forward 10-year return are only going to look at 4%. You're looking at, you're not even keeping up with inflation, and it's not going to be good times. Now, one of my big passions is the Federal Reserve, and as soon as, I was on the class that won the national competition on the Federal Reserve against Harvard and Yale and MIT and all those people, except I wasn't in the competition because they were all a bunch of status nerds. I didn't want to go down to spend my weekends going down to New York City. I wanted to spend it with sorority girls instead. But anyways, what this chart shows is the FOMC members, which is comprised of the Federal Open Market Committee. They're the ones who vote on Federal Reserve interest rates. So these are their own predictions of where interest rates will be in the future. So back in 2012, they made predictions for 2012, 13, 14,
Tell them what each dot is.
in the longer run. So each one of these dots represents one of the members what their own prediction is. So like Ben Bernanke would be a dot on here back in 2012. Janet Yellen would be a dot on here, and some of the other guys in there. So this is their own prediction. So in 2012, what they were saying is by 2015, the consensus was that the rate was going to be above 4%. And so where was it? It was actually still 0 to 0.25% back in 2015. Now in 2014, they said that by today, 2017, that we'd be at about 3.75%. So instead, it was just raised I think 2 weeks ago. So now we're at 0.75 to 1. So we're between that range. So, I never thought there would be, the only reason they're raising rates is so that way they can lower them in the future and have some sort of, look, we're going to do something, let's try to talk the stock market back up type situation. But I know that they can't really actually raise rates because that's not even the rate the government borrows money at. That's only the interbank lending rate for overnight lending. So even when the rate was 0 to 0.25, the government was still borrowing on average like a little under 2%. So if these geniuses did have the rate at 4%, then that means even if we were to borrow money at 5% of 20 trillion is $1 trillion a year in interest. And how the hell are you going to pay how are you going to pay $1 trillion a year in interest when you've got that would be more than Social Security, more than Medicare, which those obligations are even more than Social Security. So you guys get where I'm going with this. Then in 2016, they thought by 2020 that we'd be at about 2.75. So they keep kicking the can down the road because nobody wants to deal with the problem today. I think yesterday the CBO came out and said that over the next 30 years, Americans going to have a debt crisis, and our debt to GDP is going to be about 150 in 30 years from now. Well, that's going to be way sooner than 30 years from now. But what they want to do is just downplay any problem and then make it seem like, oh, it's not that bad. We can deal with this. We let your kids and grandkids deal with it 30 years from now. Now, another reason why there's two sides to every coin is when interest rates go up, it also means it's harder for people to afford homes. So this is a chart where it shows the average amount of income needed to buy the average new home in America, assuming you put 20% down. And so today it takes $64,800. Again, yeah, giving them the benefit of the doubt with the 20% down. So $64,800 is what it would take in income for the average home in America when the rates went up, which is one of the most expensive, I think it actually is the most amount of income it's ever taken. Now, the other thing that means is when rates were 3.5% in October of 2016, after Trump was became president-elect, the rate skyrocketed from 3.5 to 4.75, which is still very low in the grand scheme of things. Now, they've actually gone down since then, but the point here is that the person that could afford a $302,000 house in October could then afford a few months later $268,000 house or $34,000 less. And so my point with that is, well, I see a lot of people who are saying, well, now you got to buy houses now because the rates are going up. Well, if the rates are going up, well, now you've got less people that can then afford those same houses. So keeping everything else consistent, if you're raising the amount, raising the amount of income it takes to buy a house, there's not magically all of a sudden, this many more people who are making that amount of money to buy those houses. So I think it's going to put some strain on the housing market. And again, I made this presentation back in the beginning of January, so some of this stuff, might seem like it's pretty obvious now. But another big factor here is that I thought that the only reason Republicans were voting on good stuff the past 8 years is because they knew that it wasn't going to pass, so they had political cover to vote on good stuff. And so, some of the problems I see here is, tax reform is much needed, but it's not going to be easy to pass. So it's easy to say, we can have, now that we've got all the Republicans controlling everything, that we're going to pass all this great stuff. Well, the Republicans are the swamp that's in there, and we can really see their true colors now that they control everything and that nothing's being done. They have all these healthcare bills that have already been written and shelved, and instead they're trying to push Obamacare light. And I don't want to step on Frank's toes wherever he is, because I'm sure he can learnify us about, Trump targeting the Freedom Caucus, which I think that's about the dumbest move he could possibly make.
Right.
And so, people are putting way too much faith that the GOP will actually pass Trump's proposals. The healthcare reform, even if and again, I did this in the beginning of January when I made this, it's not going to be easy to implement. And even if we did get something passed, it's going to take a very long time for it to trickle, I don't want to say trickle down, but to eventually have us see some reform. I mean, my family, we just had a baby, so I'm going to have to pay this year, because I own my own business, $21,000, including the deductible and healthcare premiums. At that, because I didn't want to have to pay $25,000 to have a C-section. It's getting to the point where people like me are just going to start, putting my house in a trust, putting all the businesses in LLCs, which they already are, and just say, screw it, I'm not going to buy health insurance because, I'm an Ironman triathlete and I shouldn't be having to spend $15,000 a year on premiums with $6,000 deductibles. It's just absolutely insane. And at what point is enough is enough? So we've also got, infrastructure spending. So we're talking about spending $1 trillion over 10 years. Well, so the stock market's gone up $3 trillion since Trump was elected. So on the hopes that we might be spending $1 trillion over 10 years. So okay, we're bidding it up $3 trillion, so that way we're going to spend, $1 trillion. I don't think it makes any sense. We also have, potential trade war and currency war implications that are going on because, there's always two sides of every coin. So, having all of our stuff get manufactured in China, that's good for the American consumer, but it's also bad for the American consumer who also is the American worker because now their job's over in China. But if you actually think about it, we're getting probably the better end of that deal because we're giving them fake fiat money that we printed up, and then we're getting their goods over here. So we're giving them funny money that we're going to have to inflate away or not pay back honestly one way or another, and we're actually getting real goods. So how are we doing on time here?
Good.
Okay, another thing I wanted to talk about was demographics, another big headwind. So the average American, according to the Census Bureau, spends the most amount of money in their lifetime at age 46. So you had the baby boomers who were born between 1946 and 64, who when Clinton was in office, they were reaching their peak spending years. Well, now those baby boomers, 10,000 a day, are turning 65. So now they're going to be a net drain in the system because now they're going to be collecting Medicare. They're going to be collecting Social Security. So that's a gigantic. They also realized that they didn't save enough money for retirement. So now they're going to have to start, downsizing their homes. They're going to have to start, taking money out of their retirement. These are to fund their retirement, which is, all big headwinds. Again, we've also talked about, Trump and Mnuchin have talked about having 50 and 100-year bonds. Again, no one's even dumb enough to buy the 30-year bonds today. Almost no one's even dumb enough to buy the 15 or 10-year bonds. Who the hell do they think are going to buy the 50 and 100-year bonds? And what type of rate would you need to buy a 50 and 100-year bond? And so even if it was 5%, which you'd be insane to do that, again, 5% of 20 trillion is $1 trillion a year in interest, and then we're going to take our interest cost from 200 billion to $1 trillion, and it's going to implode everything immediately. So there's no way that's going to happen. And again, once the world figures out that we need to print money forever, stocks are either going to soar because they realize we're just going to devalue the currency and print a whole bunch of money, like it did in Germany in 1913. Their stock market was 126. By 1923, it was 27 million. That didn't mean everybody was doing great. It meant that now your loaf of bread costs $200. Or we're going to have a deflationary spiral first, which then is probably going to lead to us printing a whole bunch of money, which will then probably lead to the market going back up anyways. But this really only affects you if you're really close to retirement. Again, I don't have time to get into all that, but there's an audit the Fed movement getting ground. Again, you're probably like, who cares about audit the Fed? We want to end it. But again, I'm mainly giving this presentation to my clients who aren't, anarcho-capitalists or they're regular people, I guess. This is a chart that shows the central bank money printing from around the world. So in blue, we have the Federal Reserve. So the Federal Reserve stopped printing money in October 2014. That's also coincidentally enough when the earnings per shares of the company were going down. And that's not even including all the other games they play where the companies are issuing their debt and buying back their stock with the debt. So now even though their earnings are going down, it makes their earnings per share number looks better, blah, 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 blah. So, and also what happened is about 2 days after we stopped printing money, in red there is the Bank of Japan. So then they massively increased the amount of money that they were printing just 2 days after us. And what they're doing right now is they're printing money up out of thin air that never existed, and they're buying up their version of the S&P 500 called the Nikkei 100, where the top owner of their 100 stocks is the Bank of Japan. So that is the state of Japan owning up the corporations, which is the actual definition of fascism. So I don't see anybody on the left talking about the actual fascism that's going on when you've got the state and corporate merger, especially with what Bank of Japan's doing. And then in black, you've got the European Central Bank, who then started a massive program. So we're actually printing more money today, we as a globe, than what was going on at the height of the financial crisis, and a lot of people aren't aware of this. So their program, the ECB, that they're supposed to start cutting back next month, or they're calling it tapering it down, and it's supposed to end in December. And again, I mean, does anybody think that we can just stop printing money and then all of the $180 billion a month that's going in right now, how you can print it, stop that, and have all of a sudden have everything go smoothly? There's no way. And actually, one of the Federal Reserve, ex-Federal Reserve Chairman Richard Fisher said, this is an economy, he said this on CNBC, you can pull it up. He said, this is an economy that was being held together by heroin and cocaine, and now we're maintaining it on Ritalin. An actual quote on CNBC that you can see that. So, again, I'm going to kind of just go to the high points here. This is a chart where it shows consumer confidence. So usually, the average retail person, when they're really confident, is when right before things are about to go bad. They're super confident right now. In March 2009, they were super pessimistic on the stock market, and that was like the best time you could have possibly gotten in. Again, these are different insiders at the big banks, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and these are them selling, right before and after the election to the retail person that's super confident. Then these are the very last two slides I'm going to show you is, and again, I do retirement plans for a living. I'm really just trying to tell my clients what's the best way for them, knowing all this stuff, to reach the end line. Mainly work with people that are retirees and then really successful millennials as well. So this is something called sequence of return risk, and I think it's a very important thing to understand. So this shows that if somebody were to retire, I'm trying to see what the year was. So if somebody were to retire and they were to take 4.05% withdrawal rate, 60% of the money was in stocks, 40% were in bonds, adjusted annually for inflation. If they were to retire in April 1970, they would have, after 30 years, wound up with about $2.6 million. If someone then were to retire a year earlier, in April of 1969, they would have, after 30 years, had about $600,000. And then that person that retired 4 months before them, after 30 years, would have ran out of money. So you've got a 16-month window where it shows the difference is about $2.6 million. So between having money, yes.
Well, I don't want to.
No.
I raised my hand.
No.
You
At
called
the
on
end.
me.
At the end.
You can talk to me offline. So then I've got all the other charts, and this is from Prudential and the Limmer Retirement Fact Book. I didn't just make it up. And where we're getting this from is a lot of people are familiar with the concept of when things go. Let's say something goes down 10%. You need, in order to get back, you have to go up 11.11. But what they don't understand is that when you start adding withdrawals into the mix, that number drastically skyrockets. So if the market goes down 20% and you're taking a 4% withdrawal, you actually have to go up 42% over the next 3 years in order to get back to even. Now a lot of people are in big blue chip type stocks that think that, oh, that's safe. Well, big blue chip type stocks went down 60% in 2008, 2009. So if you were to go down to 50%, taking a 4% withdrawal, you'd have to get up to 132% over the next 3 years to get back to even. Now, what I do for my clients is I go through, I'm a capitalist with 2 daughters under the age of 2, so the 30-second pitch here is what I'm doing for my clients is I'm figuring out ways to help avoid these types of risk. I'm doing 1,000 different retirement simulations for them, and then throwing in scenarios where what if the market goes down 25% year one? What would that look like for your retirement? And so a lot of people can do straight line.
Stop in 4 minutes.
All right, I'm basically done. But yes.
What do you see as the role of cryptocurrency in the future, according to this?
Well, I mean, the world's not a vacuum, so when people talk about stuff going down, well, it goes down from somewhere. That means you have to put your money somewhere else. And so, even though I'm painting a somewhat dire scenarios, I don't know what the end game or what the timing of all this is going to look like. And then again, I don't advocate putting 100% of your money anywhere, but I would put, I think that for people who understand it, that it probably makes sense to have something over there. But again, I don't use any solutions for any silver bullets or anything. Yes, sir.
If we give you a magic wand, you can do anything you want. What's your solution?
I only have 4 minutes. Solution.
You got 3.
3, sorry. Well, first off, you need to end the Federal Reserve because the biggest problem is that money is based on debt. So in order to print a dollar, you've got to create a treasury bill, bond, or note, which is debt. And so when the Fed was created in 1913, they decided that they'd have 4% interest rates. So at the end of year one, so you created $1, you then were owed $1. You then owed $1.04. So you can never pay back $1.04 with $1 because then you have to borrow another $1. And so we're in this situation where even from day one, when we're $1 in debt, there's no way to ever pay it back because the money is based on debt. So that means debt is money, and that's what I try to. And that's like my main mission. Again, a lot of people I talk with are not other libertarians, so I mainly stress this issue with them, stress the issue of the Federal Reserve, because we're basically debt slaves until we get rid of the Fed.
You said earlier in your presentation that PE ratios are now about, was it 28?
Actually, I think last time it was 29 for the CAPE.
Okay, and the CAPE, you're talking about the CAP?
Yeah, E. Yes. Yeah.
What is that?
All right, the cyclically adjusted PE ratio is, I don't know if anyone's heard of Robert Shiller, like the Case-Shiller index. So he also has his CAPE ratio, and again, there's some flaws in it, I only have a minute, but it takes the PE and smooths it out over 10 years, basically. It takes a 10-year average of it, and in about 1 minute, that's all I can say for that.
And you said that going back to the 1880s, that was like 16?
16, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, and that's,
Okay, real quick, any thoughts, maybe nothing to say about Trump hiring Goldman Sachs?
I mean, that's one of the biggest problems I have. And again, I did mention Stephen Mnuchin. I'm really pissed that he hired Gary Cohn, who's a super liberal Democrat who's pushing carbon taxes. That guy, I'm willing to give Mnuchin the benefit of the doubt, but Gary Cohn is a bad. I mean, he's up there with whoever Timothy Geithner. He's a bad guy, and he has Trump's ear. And I don't know what type of horse trading is going on for that.
Would you rather have Hillary?
No.
I mean, to give you some perspective is
Ken, bring it back here.
I walked through the airport 12 times in a Hillary for a prison shirt getting patted down. I have a 6'2" life-size Donald Trump in my office that my wife gave me for my birthday. And I started a Facebook page in September and had over 1 million and was putting out the most hardcore anti-Hillary info to the point where I got kicked off of Facebook and was reaching millions of people a week. on Facebook against Hillary. So to answer your question, I wanted Trump in there to manage the crisis because one of the creators of the Federal Reserve System, Paul Warburg, said, we were either going to have a one world currency through consent or conquest. And so I didn't want all the idiots out there and all the socialists and liberals to then be begging for it through consent. And so, of course, I'm that. But again, he's not Jesus, and he's not going to fix everything. And Jesus actually did get killed for trying to fix, their version of the Fed back then. But
Okay, one more. Right. All right. Go.
Oh, what's the name of your book? You said you wrote a book. Can we get it in the PDF format?
I can go back to my car, get a little sign-up sheet, or give you guys a business card. So I just wrote it's only like 16 pages because I didn't have time to write it longer than that. It's called How It's Rigged. I haven't actually shown it to anybody, except for my intern who helped me proofread it. But so what that's basically on is showing how the inflation rate's rigged and how they game the GDP, how they game the unemployment rate, and using the actual numbers of how they do that. And so if you want, I can give you guys a little sign-up sheet, and then I can then send it over the PDF to you guys.
Gary, real quick.
Just one point. It sounds like all this interest we're paying could be solved just by the Treasury printing U.S. notes directly and not paying that 4% to the Fed. Two presidents have tried it, and both of them ended up dead, Lincoln and JFK. That might be a reason why Trump doesn't want to do that.
And you're forgetting Andrew Jackson, who was attempted to be assassinated twice, and both the guns misfired. So yeah, so we're 3 for 3.
That's true.
But,
Thank you, Tim.
I hope I didn't bore you guys too much for an early morning answer presentation.
We did this on the radio, and the one thing that I got out of it more than anything else is a lot of the guys like Lance and I talked, he's telling me, how he's doing and the timing and stuff. It worked out great for him. I'm going, not if you were at the wrong time. So this is, and that was the point that Tim's trying to make. In a 1 to 2 year window, if you start retirement at the wrong time, you will be, 20-something years later, you think you got it all and had it planned, it's gone. So you got to, I don't know what the solution is, but there's way too much of this, and there's a reason why. It's because the government's got a dial and they keep turning it. Now, Dr. Frank has been...
One of the most important steps anyone can take in investing is figuring out how much risk they can handle. We use a tool called Riskalyze, which gives you a custom risk number between 0 and 100, with 100 being the riskiest asset you could have in your portfolio and 1 being the least. In 5 minutes, we can tell you what your risk number is, and if you'd like, we can arrange to also tell you how much risk is in your portfolio, as well as what the hidden internal fees are, dividends are. This is incredibly valuable information you'll want to help prepare for your retirement. We know that not everyone who does this will become clients, but if you found this useful, please share this on your social media feeds. If you want to find out how much risk is in your portfolio, please email info@focalpointwealth.com or please call 480-771-PLAN or 7526. Thank you. Are you interested in learning more about your Social Security options? If so, we may have the perfect tool for you. You can get started by clicking on the banner ad above or the link below. From there, you simply enter your basic information and spouse information if that applies. Next, enter your full retirement age benefit amount. Then, on the next screen, you can toggle your Social Security start date along with your spouse's to see how that affects your cumulative lifetime benefits. Finally, at the end, you will be able to see how much money you are potentially leaving on the table with your current selection. And if you'd like to schedule a free consultation where we can take a deeper dive into your Social Security options using the more advanced version of this tool, please leave your contact info on the final screen along with the best time to contact you. If you get to the end and don't want to be contacted, that's fine too, but we hope that if you found value in this tool, that you can share the page with a friend on your social media feeds to help spread the word. We appreciate you visiting our site, and we hope to earn your business someday. And remember, at Focal Point Wealth Management, your future is our focus. Over the last 9 years of my career as a financial planner, one common theme emerges amongst retirees. Tim, I wish I knew this information when I was starting out, because if I did, I would be in a much different place today. If you are a millennial or are close to one that you care about, please share millennialinvestorblog.com with them. Whether it's learning the differences between an IRA and Roth IRA or the importance of saving early, we've got them covered. We also have a place for them to open up their own retirement accounts for as little as $5,000. If they want our help, we'd be more than happy to assist them, but if they want to do it on their own, then that's fine too. MillennialInvestorBlog.com, where millennials' future is our focus.